Maybe we're not going live on Facebook.
Do you need to be live on this first before you can kick the other?
Last time we were able to go fine. Something's changed. Should have on my page.
Do we have anybody over in the live one?
No,
Brian, Leslie, and Will are now over there waiting.
Okay, now it's fine. And getting the live here. 5 seconds. Hi, and welcome. Thanks for joining us for our webinar discussion on how to manage the risks of having your data in the cloud. Okay, I'm Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, and I'm looking forward to this conversation about how to keep your data safe everywhere. We are going to start today with a real-life story of the recent OVH cloud fire and spin off the many questions you may have regarding how to protect all of your workloads and getting your backups offsite. But before we launch, I have a couple of housekeeping items for you. If you need to leave the webinar early, it's totally fine. It's going to be available for replay in 3 different ways. One, you'll automatically get a link if you registered for this webinar online. If you happen to be joining us from either YouTube or Facebook, this webinar will live there for a while, so you can come back and pick up where you left off. So second thing, I'm going to leave the dialogue open in chat. So we are going to be monitoring that. So go ahead and throw all your questions there. We'll make sure that we bring this back to the presenters at the end. And with that, let me introduce our team today. Invisible but in chat and available to answer quick questions, we have Brian Berniak, who is our Director of Sales, and we have Leslie Ferris, who is our Territory Manager, East Coast Territory Manager for Global Data Vault. As for our speakers today, those are the 2 guys in the bubbles, and we have Kelly Culwell, who is in Product Marketing for Global Data Vault, and we have Tom May, our CIO for Global Data Vault. So trust me when I say that these 2 have these conversations when we're not running a webinar, so bringing it to you live is really kind of fun. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Kelly to take it away and get us started.
Awesome, thanks Trista. So I don't know if everybody's heard or not. I'd be kind of surprised if you hadn't, because the OVH cloud fire over in France was big in the news a couple of weeks ago. Now OVH cloud is one of Europe's largest cloud providers, and they do all kinds of different cloud providing, from application workloads and things like that. So think of the large cloud providers that we have in the US, and they're comparable over in Europe. One thing that we don't normally hear about are data centers catching on fire. And we wanted to talk today about how this can happen, just how does a data center burn, things to think about when we talk about designs, what the outage entails, and just the fact that disaster can strike anywhere. Again, we often think that the data centers are impervious to these types of things, and we learned that that's not the case. So don't ever count yourself as safe and impervious to any kind of disaster like this. So the one way the data centers are typically designed, right? And Tom, I know that you have a lot of experience with this. Mine mainly deals with company-specific data centers. So I worked for a large financial institution. We built data centers that belong to the financial institution. I got to see some of the insides of those. They have redundant power and cooling and all the redundancies that you would expect in there in case something should happen from a networking perspective or a power outage or whatever. And they actually place these equipment in specific locations to avoid any interaction. So you might have generators and UPSs and things placed well away from the actual server hardware or networking equipment, sometimes even outside, and they have firewalls, not networking firewalls, but actual big concrete walls with gaps in between places. And then they do backup and replication from site to site. Tom, what are your experiences around data center designs?
With data center designs, everybody's trying to come up with a new flavor of what really works. But I think, as you covered, it's the tried and true things. It's looking at where are these generators. It's best practice, really operational. Somebody testing it. Are they logging it? Are they putting things under load? Where are the fuel supply contracts? You may be able to run 2 weeks without power. What happens after that time period? Good stewardship of water pipes is a big thing. Do they run over? Do they run under? What fire systems do they have? So a lot of it is operational outside of just the build. And I think sometimes we look at prime real estate, and not we as in Global Data Vault, but folks at saying, where should my center be? Should it be centrally located? And that can be important, but sometimes that means a retrofit of a building. So you're right. Architecture is so right. Do you want something downtown that was built in the 1800s that can just host something conveniently? Or do you want a newer build that's a tier 3 or tier 4 certified facility that takes all of these standards into play? There's so much to consider. And I think from your story, with the data center fire that you're going to cover, I think we sometimes just let somebody else handle it without asking the right questions. And that's why this topic is so near to my heart, is do we ask those questions? We can't go into this blindly.
Yeah, and ironically, you talked about location and whatnot. The OVH Cloud Data Center that was a part of this incident is on a peninsula in a river. So ironically, there's water all around it, which the firefighters actually used to help put out the fire. I think on the previous picture, there was a boat, shooting water up into the fire. This particular data center was originally built in a modular design, and the way that they did it was using shipping containers or semi trucks, the back ends of semi trucks, that type of feel, or the things that you see stacked on cargo ships. And it was very modular. And so they were moving away from that, but they have 4 instances of data centers, which a lot of these hosting providers and data center providers do. They'll have multiple instances of data centers in the same geographic location, separated somehow by all the things that we've talked about, these redundancies and precautions and things like that. And for whatever reason, the UPS design, the generator design, something happened that a fire started, and it spread very quickly, and that was their issue. That was a concern. So you look at one of these things, I think it was like 5 stories tall, and having data centers and multi-level buildings is not new. I mean, people do it all the time. But you just think about, where was that UPS? What happened to it, and why did it catch on fire? Allegedly, right? That's where they speculated it came from. So, Trista? All right. So when we talk about offsite backups, obviously that's what we do. Specifically for OVH Cloud, Tom, the customers at this facility had the option to buy backups or offsite replication, and it was pretty cheap. Now, in this instance, those backups were not offsite. They were still sitting on premises, and that's why when this happened, some of these applications and some of these workloads were actually down for 10, 11, 12 days, and the data center themselves were like, activate your disaster recovery plan. We can't fix this. We're not going to be able to bring these back up, and we're trying to figure out what to do with the rest of the stuff. So what are the benefits and risks that you see from an offsite backup perspective? And then let's talk about the 3-2-1 rule and the differences between replication and DR.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so much benefit to being offsite, and truly offsite. In the world that we live in, so many things are cloud driven. You have the Azures of the world, you have Amazon, and you just believe it's going to work, right? And we always like to joke, Kelly, you and I say this all the time, the cloud is just somebody else's computer. I think a lot of companies market that concept, but it really is true. We have a cloud at Global Data Vault, and guess what? Their computers. So who are the stewards of those computers? At the end of the day, that's us. But who is the steward of the data? That's the customer. Unfortunately, they're not in the data protection business, so there's a big gap. Who is the subject matter expert in that? Well, that's where your cloud provider kind of bridges that gap. So there's a lot of benefit to doing it, and you have to really get it out of your ecosystem. Just dropping it into an Amazon and saying, well, zone 1 to zone 2. What do you really know about zone 1 and zone 2 other than that they're a mouse click away? That's very dangerous. And I think these people in this particular outage learned very quickly that they had zone 1 and zone 2. Unfortunately, they were probably right next door to one another. Right. And so, great, 2 copies of the data. It kind of reminds me of the early days of when we started seeing certifications in IT. You go back to your early Microsoft and Novell days, and they'd always zing you on these tests. And they'd say, do you have a backup? And you'd say, of course. And they'd ask your strategy. Well, I do some sort of weird rotation that honestly never really worked. But the concept was I put these tapes in, and then what do? We put them right on top of the server, and we go home for the weekend. Server room burns down. Where were the tapes? Oops. So it's that same concept. We have to make sure that we're off-site, that we are still stewards of our data, but we have the right people in play. If you are not a steward, if you don't have the right people in play, your risk goes up exponentially. So that's the danger. It's a very much risk reward. It's worth it when done right. It will save your business all day.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, though, it's still, like you mentioned, it is the customer's responsibility to at least understand the status of their data protection, right? And not just take it for granted. We talk about Office 365 and things like that, where Microsoft has a shared responsibility model where they specifically state, we don't own anything about the data. You are responsible for the data. We protect the infrastructure and everything else. And it's kind of the same thing, no matter where your workloads are, which is why we're talking about it today. So they can say all the fancy things and have everything in place that they want, but ultimately they need to understand where their data is, how it is protected, and the status of that protection. Which brings us to like the 3-2-1 rule, right?
Yeah, I was going to add on to you. When we jump over to cloud-based workloads, that's the key thing with stewardship is understanding your business and your workload. It's not the idea of, oh, just protect these files, these machines. That stewardship, you know what runs your business. And we'll cover that a little forward. So I didn't mean to jump over you on the 3-2-1, but I thought it tied nicely together just as a speaking point in there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into the application groups and how that all works from a true DR perspective in just a couple of minutes. So 3-2-1, for anybody who doesn't know from a backup perspective, this is 3 copies of your data, 2 different types of media, and 1 offsite. So if you have a production copy, a backup copy, and an offsite copy, there's your 3 copies, right? 2 different types of media. Don't store your backups on the same the same storage as your production data. A lot of times, especially in smaller shops, but sometimes you get where people have the same type of storage infrastructure that's all connected, and they just drop backups over on another set of disks. Well, if the whole thing goes down or fire or burns or whatever, you're still stuck on that same media. So the 2 types of media prevents against 1 type of media failure, and then obviously the 1 offsite. What do you see around that, and what are your recommendations?
Well, I really do think that you hit the nail on the head. Beam was smart enough to realize just in the intrinsic architecture of anything, you're always prone to fail, right? And people like to throw around terms like 5 nines, 4 nines. But have you ever actually done the math to say what is a 5-9, what is a 4-9? I mean, a 4-9 can be 4 minutes, 5 nines goes further. And, that's across, say, a month or so. And it sounds really great, but what is down and when? And 3-2-1 is so genius because it's the layering of technology and copies to really bring the workload up. It takes the percentage of failure down in one area. So hypothetically, you have a network failure somewhere. Well, the multiple copy saves the day. If you have a software failure in one spot, well, if it's existing in 3 spots, you have other pieces of software to use. It's very much akin to, and I go back to kind of the infrastructure side because I think a lot of our customers struggle with this. They'll get some request on the business side that says, let me have 5 9 uptime, right? I always need internet up. It's the life of our business, inbound and outbound, right? So you go talk to all of your providers, and no provider really covers you on a 5 9. Oh my gosh. So what do? You have to get a second provider, do all this fancy BGP stuff. Your head kind of spins, and boom, now it's always up. Why? Because you took two lower up times and bridged them together. That's the cornerstone of 3-2-1. And I'm not really sure that anybody before Veeam had really thought about, let's apply this to backups. Let's go ahead, 3 copies, 2 different medias, one off-site. And you hit the nail on the head. So many times people write those backups to the very systems that could fail. When you look at that storage you have and you built this big array and it's guaranteed to be up by whatever vendor, well, it goes down and you're like, oh no, I have backups that are now written there. You didn't follow the 3-2-1. So I like to say 3-2-1 is my religion.
Yeah. And unfortunately for the customers in this OVH cloud incident, that wasn't followed. Otherwise, their outage may have been a few minutes or maybe even a few hours, but that was certainly going to be better than 11 days or however long it took to get some of these services back online, if they could even do it at all, right? Because some of them were just like, we can't restore your data. Sorry. Because somewhere in there, those customers signed an agreement that said, hey, we're not responsible for your data, et cetera. They signed it just standard terms and conditions, whatever. And when this fire happened, the customer's like, where's my data? And they're like, don't know, didn't you back it up? So that leads us into replication and disaster recovery. Now, all this is sort of tied together, right? Backups themselves aren't necessarily a complete solution. Replication by itself isn't necessarily a complete solution. Disaster recovery is built, at least from our practices and our best practices and what Veeam does, is really built around a holistic view, right? Can you talk about how we do it, or at least some theories around combining backups and replication to create a complete DR plan?
Absolutely. And it's actually replication, DR, and our enhanced data protection product. When we started in this business a long time ago, before DR was a DR thing, we really built the cornerstone of the business of being able to recover the customer. We like to throw around the metric called quality. Am I good? Am I recoverable in the appropriate amount of time? And there's a lot of language behind all of that, but that's it in its simplistic mode. So we knew if we offered just one product in a suite, it really didn't do the job, that you needed the combination. So how we build this all out, we have typical DR. This is based off of Veeam's Cloud Connect technology, and with some secret sauce, we're able to build out of these. That's your first layer of defense. You have your file levels, you can bring up your VMs, and it works well. It builds out a robust retention. We need this for compliance. We need this for malware. Sometimes you have to go back in time, right? Works really, really well. But that technology does not always meet your time thresholds. Maybe instead of once every 4 hours, you really need to bring something up in 15 minutes, in an hour. So we stack on replication and the technology works slightly different. So that brings us a better time objective. A great question people will ask is, well, if I'm able to hit my time objective, why do I need that traditional DR? Like, well, if it's going to run so many points in time across just say 20 hours, what happens if you have an issue that you don't discover for 20 hours and it happens? Somebody goes home, somebody goes to sleep, shift change, someone didn't check, and voila, something has wormed its way through the environment. Well, those other backups help cover it. So that brings a little bit more stability. You couple in with enhanced data protection, and we've done some talks on this before, the insider threat. Not just the accidental delete, but a vector comes in, it targets the backups. The sad thing is if they find those backups, and they will because they want to get paid, they will delete those backups in all 3 copies on the 2 different media and the one that is offsite. Enhanced data protection brings that containerization outside of the environment to make sure it is untouchable by that site. So really you need the stacking of replication, DR, and enhanced data protection to just make sure you recover. Anything less than that is simply irresponsible from my mindset.
Yeah, and even from a basic difference, you might just need to recover some files. So we talk backup as a service. Maybe you just need to get some files or a database or something, more granular or specific that was deleted or that you don't have on your on-premises systems anymore. That's when you would look to maybe a backup. But when we talk about DR, hey, we're bringing up entire networks, the entire infrastructure, everything that goes along to make all of those things run. I think that's a good segue into the next slide. So we look to protect all the workloads. And as I was mentioning with disaster recovery, you have to consider, hey, I've got this web server, I have this application server, I have this SQL server, this database backend. All of those things work together to form one application. So it's important, Tom, when you were talking about like your RPOs and your RTOs and your uptimes and all of that, that you group all of those systems together so that you don't just get the web server and you forget the other two, and then your SOL on your SLA, basically, from that standpoint. So think about your applications when you're talking about your workload protection and disaster recovery, right? How do they all fit together? And that is going to swing you into a cohesive DR plan, making sure people understand their roles, making sure, Tom, that here's your task if we go into a DR situation. Kelly, here's my task when we go into a DR situation. And when you understand how all of these pieces work together, that's what's really going to give you a cohesive disaster recovery plan, and not just, I need to start restoring servers. When you talk about start restoring servers, we're talking technology from like 10 or 15 years ago, because these days disaster recovery plans mean I need to turn on these servers somewhere else immediately or as soon as possible. And that's one of the great things that virtualization brought us, but also Veeam with the replication technology and the way that they can spin things up from physical into virtual and whatnot. What are your experiences with this, Tom? And as far as like customers, and do you see them taking these types of considerations when they talk to you about disaster recovery?
They're not, unfortunately. Many people in the DR world still live off of just get it up, right? It used to, the way I like to think about it is originally used to be do a file level protection and just get my files back. Well, in the early days of Global Data Vault, we did that and we did that well. But then people are like, well, I don't know how to access these files. And we're like, well, they're there. And that's kind of where DR birthed out of, right? We're talking over a decade ago. It's not a newer technology. So many people now buy Veeam, they put it in place, they get it to work, but they don't think about the procedural side, right? Everything is a process. It's either people or it's technology. The tech is there. The process, just get it done. Let's think about that for a moment. Let's say that I'm an online ordering boutique and I'm doing millions of transactions an hour. If I say just get it all up, if we're not targeted in what we do, it comes at a great business expense. So if I say get it all up and I'm bringing up accounts payable systems and dedicating manpower to bringing these up and QCing them and to make sure that a vendor can get paid, which may not happen in 20 days because it's not the end of the month, right? What's the expense? The transactional database, the ordering system where I'm losing these millions. So it's understanding these application groups to turn on online ordering. What systems do I need? As opposed to accounts payable, what systems do I need? And guess what? Sometimes they cross, but it's coming up and thinking it's an app. What do I deliver? How do I bring it up? And traversing through. The next stage is, of course, the testing of it all and making sure that it's absolutely executable. It completes. Everybody has their role, like you say. So we do see there's a shift in the marketplace, but often when we meet new customers, it's talking about their cohesive DR plan to help them understand it's not just a piece of software that you click some boxes and send. It's really much deeper thought. And that's what we're here for.
Yeah, and the other thing that we can help with that sometimes people overlook is, and I can relate to this personally, when I used to have to work like some priority one tickets or something, when you know, the kind of thing where everybody's standing over you looking at what you're doing to fix the problem, and you're doing everything you can, and either you just can't fix it or it takes a while, but your phone's ringing, everybody needs an answer now. People kind of tend to panic, especially during crisis, or when there's a big outage or something, and everybody scatters, right? They're all just not doing different things, or they're trying to do things that they think is important, but they may lack something, may forget something. So with a DRaaS provider like us, you make a phone call, and you've got all these additional hands to enable your disaster recovery, right? We're going to help you bring all of that up. And I think that's important for companies to realize too, is it's not about you being able to do it all. It's about, in the moment, are you going to be able to, successfully enact your disaster recovery plan? Or do you need to do other things? Do you need to make sure people are safe? Do you need to set up phones? Do you need to, do all of these other activities versus making sure your servers are spinning up properly? And that's where, Global Data Vault and DRaaS providers who offer that service can come into play.
No, absolutely. It's really incident command. In Geek speak, we have incident commanders running bridges. In our world, we'll see multiple of these command centers running. The probable number one call we get is the malware vector. When this happens, you're running executive teams to figure out what happened. They're interfacing in with insurance teams and providers to figure out, is this covered under cyber policies and whatnot? You're trying to restore service, but hold forensic. And this is an area that many people have not charted these waters. And those that you would normally rely on, like cyber carriers, well, at the end of the day, their interest tends to be, payout minimization. They're not necessarily making the decisions that are right in the moment. When you bring someone like Global Data Vault in, we bring that expertise to the command center. We're able to say, we've been here, we've charted it. Hey, while we're doing this, additional teams are working to recover you based upon predefined plans that have been tested and executed. And now let's talk about recovery. Let's talk about restoration and bring that anxiety level down. You're right. So everyone's not hovering all over, and we have a good execution. That is key critical to your provider, not a box in the sky. You need that command.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We often joke about, well, what happens when you make that phone call? And I'm going to pick on AWS just because they're huge, right? I'm not knocking any of their services or anything, but like if something happens and you need to recover data or restore or do your DR or whatever, and you call somebody, who do you get? Is somebody going to answer you who knows your business or who knows your information? And that brings up a good point about disaster recovery testing. So who's tested your data? Did they find any issues when they did that test that you need to know about before an actual disaster? Here at Global Data Vault, we do quarterly tests for every customer. We call those Build Tuesdays. Tom, can you tell us what a Build Tuesday looks like for a typical customer and why it's important?
Oh, absolutely. So as you approach Build Tuesday, dubbed appropriately because it begins on a Tuesday.
And it's today.
Exactly. So right now there are teams of engineers that are using our automated systems to bring about some builds. What they're going to do is quality check and make sure everything's looking good. We want to make sure when we come to a scheduled build, the customer will have stakeholders ready to go. They're going to have hands to go at those keyboards. We want to be respectful of their time. So the engineers are going to make sure all the diligence is done, make sure there's been no major changes leading up from the week before, working very closely, but day of days is Build Tuesday. The engineer engages the build and starts a timer, and they start tracking their SLAs. Is it going to hit RTO, RPO? And they start building. They're going to take the data outside of the enhanced data protection container and go, can we recover from these containers that are outside of the ecosystem? Yes, benchmark 1 met. Start building those servers. Great. Did they all come up? Awesome. Are they all IP'd correctly? Can they log in? Do they speak? Base level test, Active Directory, SQL services, do they work? Great. Benchmark 2, benchmark 3. Let's build that network, right? Not only do they have to just talk to each other, they have to somehow be able to traverse if they're internet facing. Okay, security, networking. All right, Benchmark 3, benchmark 4, remote access. How do these folks get in to test their network? Well, often they get sent to Starbucks, so they're super, super excited to get out of the office and get some coffee, and they work, but everything works the same as if it's natively. Wow, that's amazing. Now, what I really, really do enjoy about the concept of a test, Kelly, and it's hard to wrap your head around. I like to look at the concept of this: which is the more successful test? It just worked, or it just worked, but hey, provider, we have some feedback for you. We've noticed this tuning that needs to happen. I'll pitch it over to you. Which world are you in? And then I'll give you the answer I really wanted. So I'm setting you up here on live TV here, Kelly.
Yeah, I want to know if something breaks. And part of the answer to that question is so in IT, we make the joke, there's always an it depends answer, right? So we look at our DR plan and we say, can we function at X amount of percentage of our normal resources, right? So do we expect, or can we allow certain systems to run at a reduced performance because we know it's DR? And this was usually the case for if you were using older systems or something like that, that might not run as quickly, but they would still run. So, in this case, maybe you have file servers or, accounting software or something that doesn't need to run for the next 20 days. Maybe you don't care if they run a little bit more slowly. If you have your high transactional things, you probably do care if they run, slower. And that's something that you need to take into consideration. So I want to know if, hey, does it run? Yeah. If this is a little bit slower, cool. That's fine, right? We'll accept that. But this isn't where we need it to be. And when you think about things like latency between application layers, so if an application, again, we go to our web page, application layer database, if there's too much latency here, the application might as well not be running because it can't function anyway, right? So we need those customers, the people that deal with that on a day-to-day basis, to come back and say, hey, this doesn't work as we would like. I'm glad we found out about it now. How can we improve, right? And that's, I think, the overall goal.
Oh yeah, no, you hit it perfectly. And I asked you that because you made the comment in the beginning, who do you call? All right. So you say, I can do this in the big cloud provider. I don't need someone like a global data vault. I can AWS it because we're picking on them right now and they do wherever. Well, when it starts running slow, do you pick up your phone and call Jeff Bezos? Like, is he on your bat phone just going, I'm here to help? No, you're Googling like crazy. With your service provider, such as Global Data Vault, we're there going, hold up, let's look at this tiering and whatnot. Interestingly enough, what people don't realize is it's not the server speed, it's not the storage, it's not the processor. The favorite one I like to see is, my accounting. I run this query lookup and it takes 6 seconds and it just always works. Why does it take longer with Global Data Vault? And you're like, wow, that's strange. How long is it taking? 10 seconds. Okay, run it again. Now it's back at 6. Why is that? Well, we've powered off a machine. There's no cached queries. So as they educate their customers, their endpoint users, they understand as they go through this test what will happen in real world. So with Global Data Vault, those stakeholders are coming on board. The IT guy's not going, that's good enough for accounting. That's good enough for web. No, the stakeholder who's in charge of that system comes into the test to offer the feedback loop, right? Feedback really is a gift, as we say.
Yeah. And it has to be some kind of 360 feedback type thing, because as we all know, the people in their own departments with their own things are going to always holler about their stuff because that's what they know. But the upper levels, the executives may say, it's okay, again, going back to it's okay if this doesn't run as quickly as it normally does for now, right? And even if it's a caching thing or if it's just a reduced resource performance thing, because you're in DR, executives in the company need to have a hold or a say in all of that to make decisions for their business. And that's something that I think that we execute well on too, is to get that feedback, like you were saying, from the stakeholders, from the different departments. But again, as part of the DR plan, it needs to be communicated. Hey, we understand. Again, here's the order of things need to come up. Here's what needs the best performance, et cetera, and just continue to improve on it.
It's great. And those feedback, you'd be surprised that people don't even understand their business processes until they
Yeah.
go through a DR simulation. They believed this one system was key critical, and they realized that there was a work stoppage in the test because other groups weren't working. So what they thought was frontline wasn't. It is critical to go through those tests. I cannot stress it enough, and have that bat phone to call somebody. Hey, Global Data Vault, I need your help with this. Have you seen this before? Yes, customer, we have a very similar business. We've seen this. Let's try this. It's that hive knowledge, and that's what you get. You're getting, just a subject matter expert, home run hitter of just backup and DR with Global Data Vault. It's priceless.
Yeah. So that's a good transition into what we do at Global Data Vault. We wanted to keep this more open dialogue about data center design, about things you need to think about, how not to set your data center on fire type things, or things to watch out for, questions to ask. Don't rely on somebody telling you that we're backing up your data. If you use a provider like us or any provider, they better be able to tell you and show you what's being backed up, when, how, the viability of that, show you the testing, et cetera, like we've talked about. That's part of the fully managed white glove service that we bring. Every customer, no matter who you are, gets that. And we do truly care about our customers. I always like to say we put the service back in as a service, and we're not just here for here's your storage, dump it and have fun, right? We do offer backup as a service, DR as a service, Office 365 backup. And we have some components like enhanced data protection that work into that to supplement those. We support VMware Hyper-V and Acropolis, which is a Nutanix hypervisor, as well as physical servers and endpoints via agents. So, we can theoretically take your physical servers and physical workstations and turn them into virtual machines and power them on in our cloud facilities, should you need that as well. So it's not only virtualization, it just makes it easier. But again, Veeam really has stepped it up with the way that they can recover machines of any type anywhere.
Okay, that was great conversation, guys. Thanks. I do have a few questions from the audience and a few that we received prior to launching the webinar tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and pitch those out to you. And we're going to start with the worst question first. I don't even like to think about it, but heaven forbid, if Global Data Vault's data center has a fire, what's your procedure to get your customers' data recovered?
Well, I don't know if I work here anymore, Trista, at that point. I think somebody else has to take the helm there because I've planned poorly. But go back to the concept of 3-2-1, 3 copies of the data, 2 different media, 1 offsite. So it's your mitigation. Have you failed if your offsite provider fails? This is mind blowing for a lot of folks, right? I wrote that check. It better be there. You're right. From a financial mindset, you do have some pain. Remove the financial. Are you down? No. What's the probability local will fail? Local will fail. Remote is going to fail. It is a very low probability. That's why 3-2-1 is so important. Secondly, customers that want to be in that upper echelon, hey, they can do 3-2-1, and I'm going to say even 3-2-2. I don't know if I'm coining something here, but 3 copies, 2 different media, 2 different offsites. You can go Global Data Vault Data Center, Global Data Vault Data Center as well. You can really keep racking and stacking these to the level of availability. But now you get into risk mitigation and costing and whatnot. Does it become counterproductive? You can rack and stack this all day long. But Global Data Vault is in tier 3 certified data centers. We have specialties in making sure that we meet industry standards to make sure we're not replicating side by side. We're not putting generators where they shouldn't be. And we have the experts to be able to do that so somebody can sleep easily. And I'll kind of end this topic away from going back to AWS, right? AWS, has anybody toured their facility where their data is? I don't know. I often have to arrange for secure, background checked tours of our facilities so people can see the iron that their equipment's running on. They can see the generators. They can see the service logs. One person even asked for oil change notations on our generators. It was crazy. Great questions, but we could answer them.
that kind of leads into another one of the questions we have here is who has access to our data in your data center?
Hmm. So, who has access? Well, Global Data Vault staff. We always operate under what we call least privilege access. So, in other words, just because you work here doesn't mean you'll be there. You must have the credentialing and the requirement to access the data. So, let's say with my level, I can really get into any facility, but I can't just walk in unjustified. I must have a reason to be there. So, we maintain that everybody's background check. We have physical access logs. We have to have background checks. We have to have IDs. We have security cameras. We have badges. We know every cage that's touched, entered. So, who has access? Only the person that needs to with the proper requirements in a fully documented scenario.
Okay. Here's one that we get, I think, from sales quite a bit. Do you have redundancy?
Do we have redundancy? Absolutely. So in this data center, when we talk about redundancy of the actual servers, yep, we have A side power, B side power. We have generators in place, contracts in place, battery floats to make sure the automatic transfer switches float over. Redundancy from the Veeam side. Remember, I said I had a religion: 3, 2, 1, 3 copies, 2 different media, one off site. Your side, my side, or that new coined term I like, your side, my side, and another my side. So yes, fully redundant.
So Tom, I hear
And
you.
our data centers are actually, more than 250 miles apart. So we're not worried about a fire that affects one affecting the other, or a tornado
That's
or hurricane. And that's another thing to take into account.
Yes, there was a story many years ago about a tornado that went through a certain section of a state and it knocked out 2 separate cities, which were far enough apart. They should have never hit that tornado, but man, wasn't their day. Basically clipped both. So, yes.
Tom, I've heard you mention Veeam several times. Do you want to maybe touch on the Veeam expertise that we have at Global Data Vault?
The theme expertise, I might be biased, but I think we have the best expertise outside of Veeam. On our staff, we have a multitude of Veeam certified engineers. All of our implementations group hold that designation. We do have 2 certified architects, which is a much more difficult certification to achieve. Many outside of Veeam don't actually have this concept. Here is Veeam certified engineer. How do I use the product? How do I have best practices? It's kind of becoming an expert in that. The architect is, how do I scale out these production workloads? How do I ensure RTO and RPO? How do I handle hundreds of thousands of servers and multitude of locations and have the proper resources for recovery? It's really top tier. And then above that, we actually do have a Veeam Vanguard on staff who is really one of the elite in the world. Just a handful of these folks that sit inside with Veeam developers and speak about trending in the industry, and they're scripting and giving code feedback, and they might as well work for Veeam, but they're kind of this outside silo of just independent knowledge, keeping Veeam sharp. So we do have one of those gentlemen on staff, and it's a pleasure to have that access to the inside track at Veeam because of it.
Great. I have a question from chat. What strategies are typical during a recovery and what surprises have you found?
Wow. I used to look for the days where we would have power outages and we would have server part breakages. And, that was kind of the how do we get through it. But typical surprises that we tend to find is that malware exists. And not only is it just trolling around the data trying to do damage, that interestingly enough, this is the biggest shock I found. It didn't matter if they were a Fortune 100 customer or if they were a dentist office. Somebody's looking to get paid. When they're targeting, they're not necessarily looking at your revenue or your presence online. It's just happenstance that they were able to worm their way in and they're there. Now, once it tacks in, it sits there and it watches and it logs, and it's there long enough to make sure it falls out of your retentions. They really want to get paid, and they really want to hurt you. The more you hurt, the more you'll pay. Now, they don't know if it's in the millions of dollars. And shocking, we had customers come to us that prior to meeting us, they had gone through millions and millions of dollars worth of this damage. And that's why they were having the conversation. They didn't want to be there again. We've seen small shops get hit as well. So that was a big surprise for us. But this kind of malware vector of now it takes the data ransom. Well, before it does that, it's going to attack the backups. And then it was reaching to the cloud. That's why we developed enhanced data protection. We knew we needed to get away from even the Veeam ecosystem to be safe. How can we protect Veeam from itself, so to speak? Because this malware brought about this random person showing up remotely inside the gates, impersonating a valid credential to be able to do backup stewardship, delete the remote, delete the local. Once it's gone, encrypt, and it's payday for them, right? You can hear the little slot machines going off behind them. When we started using enhanced data protection, that has saved so many customers to the point where it's just there. Like, it's part of that suite that we have. And I find that the first time somebody uses it, they're the most grateful people that I've ever met. Like, they didn't know how valuable it was. It's really like a great insurance policy. So that is definitely a surprise we've had. The other thing is typically the failback procedures, I call it. So many people are so worried about failing the data over, and how will it go and how quickly can you get it there? What's the other half of the equation? How do I get it back? What do I do? How do I not interrupt operations? They never ask the question. They start thinking about shipping things. And that's where Global Data Vault, we're like, listen, we're going to reverse engineer. You're going to become the cloud provider. We're going to architect it for you. We're going to be the customer data, if you will, and we're going to reverse seed load that back with minimal downtime. So transferring operations up and down, that has been the big wins for us, is that enhanced data protection and that recovery, that failback procedure so seamlessly. I know you definitely don't get that with, those AWS instances or even some other service providers. It's running, it's your responsibility to get it back. And that can be pretty scary if you've not navigated those waters.
Yeah, and another surprise is what happened to this server? Wait a minute, where's this server that I need? If any of you, having been in IT for a while, you guys know that dev never goes into production, right? So what we'll see is somebody has a test server, a dev server, or maybe even a virtual machine admin somewhere creates a server for somebody, and all of a sudden there's a production workload on it. Nobody tells the data protection folks to add that to backups, or to get that offsite, or to put that into the DR plan. So when these types of events happen, all of a sudden we're missing servers from remote repositories, or the DR plan isn't there, or it's a critical component that nobody accounted for. And it just becomes one of those, okay, who's getting fired now moments, because nobody knows what happened to this, and it's just suddenly spun out of control. So I know that we're going to talk in the future about how to work out those DR plans, but that's definitely one surprise that I've seen, is that server that came out of nowhere that's suddenly critically important.
The other surprise people don't realize either about their backup providers, we probably have the most susceptible environments to malware, because when someone calls us for a malware vector, we're bringing up an environment which could be compromised. So they don't realize that they're falling back into a compromised state, and they're going to need that expertise to continue rolling that clock back. Well, if you're in a clean state, there could be a ticking bit of a time bomb in there of malware. So it's important that your provider monitors all of your OSI layers. Not to be overly, nerdy in here, but I have my chance, so I'm sneaking it in. Layers 1 through 3, that's where most providers are. Networking and routing is secure. Well, you know what? That's great until software has to come into it. Layers 4 through 7. Somebody has to click something. It has to run somewhere, and that's where it unleashes. So making sure your provider is monitoring with a SOC, has the right AI behind it to make sure that they're secure, bringing you up, and somebody who's coming up side by side with you in a separate silo. Are they really siloed? And that's a shocking thing during the interview process. I rarely see it come up. If another customer comes up and they are having malware, how do you protect me and my failover? Ah, most people don't think about that. We have, because we have to be stewards of that data. We have to protect. Once the workload moves to global data vault, we are the production network, and we take that very seriously.
Yeah, and I know that we've had customers who've had recurring infections, just like right after the other, because they didn't get the right computer cleaned up, or maybe it was a computer they forgot about, or something like that. If you guys remember SQL Slammer from back in the like 2000, early 2000, it was a widespread, horrifically. I mean, you think about it as like the pandemic of viruses for computers, right? Because it was proliferating like crazy. I worked in a 1.3 million square foot building, and we had to go around to every cubicle because people were leaving computers and servers, workstations under their desks or in closets or in small server rooms. We had to go that entire building to every PC and unplug it to see if the threats disappeared. And that's, again, to your point, having that kind of monitoring. Now it's much more advanced, but having that kind of understanding of where things come from, how to isolate them, how to recover from them. I think that's critical too.
Okay, we have another question from chat. Can agents' jobs recover locally?
They can, if you're engineered properly. So the concept of the agent, it will run within the operating system on a physical box. Actually, it can even run inside of a virtual machine, but it's within the operating system. In order to recover it back, you need someplace to recover it to. So often people go, well, if this one machine dies, I just recover it back. Well, that's assuming you have the hardware. There are steps that we can take at Global Data Vault utilizing what we call local data vault, an LDV, to be able to have a Veeam instance run and be able to bring these physical machines up on that particular device, so you can take hours of downtime, sourcing parts, rebuilding, imaging. You're down 20 hours to, hey, I'm just, 15 minutes to an hour or so. I'm up and running, and, threat matrix gone. Whew, anxiety lowered. We continue to work. And then when we're ready to have those parts sourced and we're ready to do that final recovery, it's a planned outage. Maybe there's not a lot of people working at Saturday morning at 2 a.m. All right, let's execute then during a planned maintenance window. I know from IT, even internally at Global Data Vault, planned maintenance windows are always much more acceptable than the oops, it's not working moments of the life. And so those agent recoveries are so critical to have that in your strategy.
Yeah, especially for the OVH cloud. I mean, so we talk about protecting workloads anywhere, right? And obviously, if it's not a VMware environment or Hyper-V environment or AHV or something like that we have access to locally, because we do have to have access to some of the to do it the way that Veeam does it with hypervisors. You have to have better access than what like an AWS can give you. So we treat those almost as physical machines. We put an agent inside of them to be able to protect that information and that data and those workloads. For this question, can agents recover locally? That's the point, right? So when we talk about mitigating risk, no matter where your data lives, if those OVH cloud workloads had, this type of an agent on them, and they were backing up to another facility, which is then locally, or even the company's infrastructure, if you can, or the global data vault, then they would be protected, right? And that's the point, is I can recover anything to anything, basically, right? So if you've got a server sitting around, you can spin up Hyper-V, Microsoft Hyper-V instance on it, restore a workload somewhere else from an agent onto that and run it as a virtual machine, or the same as in VMware, right? Gives us real flexibility versus just, hey, you have to have identical hardware because all the drivers that were backed up from that machine have to work on this other machine. Otherwise, your machine's not going to turn on, right? From back in the day scenarios. So there's great flexibility that we have now.
Okay, great. We're approaching the end of our time, but I do have two more questions that I want to get to. One, can I send a copy straight to Global Data Vault if I don't have storage on premises?
The technical answer is yes. The appropriate answer is no. So I'm speaking like a great politician here. No, we drive the quality metric, okay? Can it physically be done? Yes. But when you take an initial backup, it's pretty much like a live stream. And I like to think about the early days of, say, DirecTV. When you're watching TV and you're watching and it rains, what happens? That old rain fade and you can't see anything and you chatter and it's gone. When that happens on a backup, it stops and it resets. It doesn't pick up where it left off. But if you were to DVR that show, let's say, maybe you're not going to get that rain fade. You're going to get a good copy. That DVR would say, hey, choose one of 4 times, get the best one. Boom. I watch it. It just flows. When we write our backups at Global Data Vault, we always put them local for the live stream and then transmit off-site. When we're doing a transmission of an existing backup, you're basically doing a fancy file copy. If there's bits and pieces missing, those can pick up in the transmission, recover, and go forward. That's really powerful because I like to think of Murphy's Law. It will go wrong when it shouldn't. Somebody could say it more eloquently, but you'll find that backups written straight to the cloud work wonderfully till the moment you need it. And then you realize it's been broken. What do? You have no recovery. So we want quality. So technically, sure, you could click it. It's just not going to work consistently. Why have something that is prone to failure? That's why we have 3-2-1. That's why we don't write straight to the cloud. These best practices, this is the bench expertise of Global Data Vault with all those engineers we talked about earlier.
Okay, great. Last question. You've made reference to a DR plan, obviously, several times, and reference things to think about. Could you maybe relist or summarize the top items that should be included in every DR plan?
Yeah, and we do have some blog information on our website about this too, but it's really critical to define the tiers of your applications and your workloads, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because those are going to help you when it comes to recovering those. You need your most critical apps in tier 1, etc. Right? And then you develop recovery points around those. Your recovery time objectives per application, recovery point objectives per application, not per this server, that server, that server, because we talked about how they might be linked. I think that's key. So tiering, defining those application groups, and then defining the processes and the people beneath that. What do you have, Tom?
I'm going to piggyback right on where you are, is having the conversations outside of the IT group. You may understand how a system works. You're not responsible. You're not the stakeholder. You're critical. Have those business conversations and think beyond IT. Where are we going to meet if this happens? Where will we office? Will we work at home? How will the phones work? Will cell carriers work? It's really DR, they say, but I like business continuity plan a little bit better. It's a larger scope, and they'll say DR is a part of, so expand the conversation.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And something that I think we're going to talk about next month might be what's the difference between DR and business continuity a little bit.
Yeah, that last question was a great lead in for us to close with. So we really appreciate your time for both of you today, and hope that you'll join us for our May 18th webinar, where we're going to dive deep into how to create or put together a DR plan. So thank you, guys. I'm going to leave this slide up here just for a second. If anybody who's watching has any questions, feel free to reach out to sales@globaldatavault.com or phone number on there, and we'll be happy to address your situation one-to-one. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're done.